Hello and welcome to our podcast. It's good to meet together, even if it is over an internet situation, but it meets the need of the hour. And we share together in the things of God and how He directs us and leads us in our life. So today I'd like to talk to you about what's your life all about? Where are you heading with it? What to you would make your life worthwhile and make you call it a good life? That I've lived a life that was pleasing to me and fulfilling to what my goals and my aspirations are. It's interesting to ponder that sometimes, and there are several answers that commonly seem to come to the surface. Some people are living for money. Let's just say it bluntly as it is. They want wealth for the purposes of self-comfort. If I had just a little bit more, well, then I'd have all I'd need and I could live in such a way that I wouldn't have to worry or have anxious thoughts or sweat it out so badly. And that often drives people into gambling, hoping that they can make the big one. Interestingly, those who do sometimes strike it lucky seem to find that it doesn't produce the good life that they were hoping for. Often we hear of disastrous stories resulting from it. Well, what about fame? If we could just live so that our name would be something that is recognized. If we had such influence that just because we're known, we could maybe sway things and make a difference in the world, or at least in our family, or at least for ourselves, and achieve things that we want. Again, hard thing to get. If you get it, there are negative aspects to it, like you really have no privacy anymore. So do you really want that as your goal in life? Something to be careful about. Have a little bit of caution. Power. A lot of people just live to get power. There must be probably something very satisfying to feeling that you can call the shots and they will be done. And I think that appeals to a lot of us. Perhaps we don't see the dangers because we all think we can handle it if we're calling it. But again, the old saying is power corrupts. And there is a tendency for it to have a backlash on us that isn't so good. So maybe that's not the life we'd want to live after all. And so it goes, all kinds of things. But the question needs to be rethought, maybe rephrased a little bit. It's easier to say, well, what would be a life I'd like? What would I like to achieve in life? What is my goal and purpose in life? But that's all about me, isn't it? And I'm not sure that any one of us is able to really pull that out of the bag, as it were, and say, here's the prize worth living for. It needs to be a question that's asked on a higher level. Ultimately, finally, what is the good life? What is the life that is actually worth living? And ask that as a philosophical question as opposed to a personal one. Not what do I want, but what is it that I should do and be to truly fulfill my purpose in life? Of course, in today's culture and ideologies, where God has been basically pushed out of the picture, mankind today tends to think of himself as simply an animal. We're here by chance. We're just a combination of chemicals, of the way things sort of evolved and came out. Everything's mechanically driven or determined in advance. If there is no God, if we are just here by luck, chance, however things happened, then the question is, doesn't even matter. Throw it out, because there is no ultimate good. There is no ultimate purpose. There is nothing that's ultimately of any value. There's no such thing as justice and right and wrong, and like it's all gone forever. And it's hard to live with that concept and hold to it truly, because deep inside we know there's something more to life than just simply getting up in the morning, working, living, dying, and that's it. No. There's something inside us that God put there that says there is a God, and life is meant to be more than just a series of days and years that comes to an end with nothing to it. So there is a purpose to life. There is an ultimate good. There is an ultimate thing that we should be. So have you found it? What is it? Where are you at with that? Or are you still trying to find something to just keep you contented for the moment until there are no moments left? I'm a retired pastor. And over 50 years of ministry, I've had dozens and dozens of funerals. Some of church members and quite often people who never darkened the door of the church. But they needed to be buried, and their family had some connection and asked if I would do it, and so I did. It's interesting, funerals are, because often how things are said and what I observe tells me something about the person's life. Like I had one funeral, and the family, in trying to picture and remember what this man had really been and what he lived for, put a liquor bottle. They emptied it first. They got it that time instead of him. And they put the bottle in his casket. He was buried with it because it pictured his life. That's sad. That's what he lived for. That's what they remembered him for. Another funeral I had, they had a big picture put up of their mother. It was rather embarrassing, actually, very immodest picture, but they wanted her to be remembered for her beauty and more. That was her life, and that's how they remembered her. There was a funeral I had once where the family had not yet read the will, but he was wealthy, and they wanted to know what they were getting, and so just before the funeral, they wouldn't wait any longer. They got in a separate room at the funeral home and got the lawyers out and were having the will read to them, which did not help the funeral service at all because none of them got what they wanted, which was everything. And so they came in with a real hostile attitude against the man who was in the casket and a lot of tension amongst themselves. I've had the police at more than one funeral to keep peace amongst the family because the whole life around that person had been one of tension, conflict, anger, hostility. And so it goes. Tough when you think about it. I've even had funerals where nobody attended. No, nobody, not even the family. Where it was just me and the funeral director. The person was remembered by nobody about anything. What are you living for? What do you want to be remembered for? What do you want in your life that stands there? Have you connected with God where you find that you've got a life worth living? Jesus came to the point where he was going to die, and he knew it. He knew things were building up to his crucifixion. So he gathered with his disciples for one last meal. They were alone in a room that they had secured for this purpose. And we read from the Gospel of John, chapter 13, of something he did. Now remember, this is his last time with them. When you spend your last moments before you leave this life, as you do so, you usually want to make it count. What you really think matters comes out then. On a deathbed, and this was a pre-death scene, Jesus made known what he really was focused on in his life. So it says this: Now before the feast of the Passover, Jesus, knowing that his hour had come and that he would depart out of this world to the Father, God the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, the devil having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, that he had come forth from God and was going back to God, got up from supper, laid aside his garments, and took a towel. He girded himself. Then he poured water into a basin, began to wash the disciples' feet, to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. Wow, that's not what I would have expected to see. Here's Jesus facing death by crucifixion. He knows that. Things are coming to a climax in his life, in his ministry. And here in his Last Supper, in the last evening with his disciples, he does something that we would not probably have done ourselves. See, the custom in that particular land, they wore sandals. It was dusty, dirty. When you met and relaxed, a servant would usually come and wash the guests' feet so that the dirt would be taken off them and you could relax and feel refreshed. Nobody had done it. All the disciples are sitting there. They had no servant present, and none of them were going to do this. This is a low job. But Jesus, knowing he's going to die soon, washes their feet. That's incredible. It tells us that he knew his hour of death had come. He knew he was leaving this world very soon. So why didn't he sit down and give them his last words? Why didn't he talk about the great things he had achieved? Why didn't he give to them a picture of what they could do? Why didn't he do anything besides this? He did a common servant's job, and he washed their feet. That says a lot. Is this the kind of thing you would do to sum up your life? To say this is what it's all about? This is what I want to be remembered most for? It was for Jesus. It tells us that having loved his own, he loved them to the end. In other words, this wasn't just all new. He loved them. He cared for them. He provided for them. He watched over them. He taught them. He shepherded them. And he pointed them in a direction of what it was to really live for God. Having done that till now, he continued to do it to then. His death fitted in with his life, one of service, of love, of concern, care, and lowliness, where he served in such a high way. He knew he was going to the Father. It says he knew he came from the Father and was returning to God the Father, so he knew his relationship with God the Father. He knew the purpose of God the Father, that his life was to count, and that at the end it says he knew all things had been put into his hand. He was going to have ultimately all authority. And so instead of trying to look up and get everybody else to look up at him, he stooped down and said eventually, you should do this too. He cared. He obeyed God the Father's purpose. He loved the disciples in their need. He did what he could to help them. And when he finished all this, we look at him and say, wow, what a man. This is the love of God demonstrated. Now we can understand how he left here to go to the cross over there and willingly died for their sins, that they might be forgiven, redeemed. He cared. He made his life lived on purpose for them in fulfillment of his Father's will. That's a good life. That's something worth living for. In this day and age in which we live, we have a lot of things that are hitting us left and right. We look at the TV news every night and we see bickering, division, anger, violence, confusion, fear, anxiety. And we're all scrambling to get our little piece out of life. And we're all frustrated because we can't do what we used to do. And we're starting to find life tiring, fearful, hard to live. Because it's hard to live for yourself when you can't do anything anymore that you want to do. But for those who are focused upon God the Father and his will and purpose and love others and will serve to the best of their ability to fulfill God's purpose for them, there's a life that's still worth living. There's something to feel good about. So what are you living for? How are you living? What are you doing? Is it really worth your life?